Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kate Miller, and I am an academic tech coordinator here at CU Online. And my fellow colleague, Sean Renner, he is new. He's a new member of our team, just a few weeks in here, Sean.
Number 2.
So I grabbed him and said, "You're going to present with me."
So fresh.
Yeah. So this is Instructional Design, the thread that holds it all together session. And we're going to kick it off here with a little quote from Lyndon Leader. Lyndon is the face, the man behind the FedEx logo. So he states that I strive for 2 things in design, simplicity and clarity. Great design is born of these 2 things. Oh, can you move it?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So I think this thread, this theme of simplicity and clarity will carry through this presentation, and I think it's important to keep in your heads as you're designing your courses. So with that, we'll introduce instructional design. Instructional design is basically helping your learners make sense of the information, the content, right? So without instructional design, the learner may or may not retain the information, and with good instructional design, it will make it more efficient and more relatable and easy for your students to effectively learn the content. So why would you go through this effort of going through your course and being mindful of instructional design? Basically because of your students. So it's more than putting information in front of your learners. You want them to be known. You want to know your audience. Who are your students? What is their background? What courses they may have taken already that would help them be insightful in your course? This could be a quick discussion that you have with your students. This could be a quick quiz to assess where they're at in their level of understanding so that you, the instructor, can effectively present the content to your learners. So moving on also, why would you go through the effort for yourself too, for the instructor? Instructional design saves time and provides that context and clarity and perspective. And helping your students get that information that they need means that there's less frustration, confusion, and questions for you, the instructor, to have to deal with. So there is a need for you to be included in this as well as to why you would go through this effort. So let's knock into these 8 tips for better instructional design. I want to preface this by saying we understand that instructional design is a huge topic. There are many theories, there are many strategies. Today we really want to focus in and hone in on 8 quick tips that hopefully you find you can implement today in your course, or maybe you already are, which is fantastic. Just some tangibles that you can walk away with today. So with that, we're going to start out with number 1, which is grabbing your learner's attention. So research shows that attention spans are getting shorter and shorter as we know ourselves and about our students. So you want to make sure that you start with a spark. It doesn't have to be anything big or huge or too cumbersome or too tough to take over, but just a little something to pique their interest. So what are some ways to do this? You may consider a short video. I'm talking short, 30 seconds to a minute, to introduce the topic. Maybe you want to ask a thought-provoking question to introduce the content, to get your students thinking, to say, I'm interested in this. Maybe you want to tell a story that can, again, relate to the content. Perhaps you want to state a surprising fact. So I'm envisioning all of this on your homepage right when the student logs on. This is what they see. Maybe it's an image that you've embedded into your Canvas page that your students are mesmerized by. These are some examples, and maybe if you wanted to go a little more upscale and a little more advanced, you could create an interactive video where your student kind of is learning along. So there's hot spots in this video, and so your students know, this is a very important little tidbit. I'm going to pay attention to this. Again, it's about thinking about their attention spans. What are you going to do to grab their interest right away so that they want to delve in more?
Are you going to show an example of an interactive video?
Well, I can. I have one available. There's not one in the presentation, but I can certainly show you. The key here with grabbing the attention is to keep it short and sweet. So I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots here. So this is a course homepage, and there are a couple of things here that, for me personally, would pique my interest. So there's a really neat image here. It's very clear and describes what I, the student, need to do. So what are we doing here? That's a very bold heading that I would be able to point out and seek out and understand what I, the student, am going to get from this course in one sentence. So again, that attention span. There's an intro to the course and the instructor. There's a cool little floated div here on the right that calls out some social media. These are things that students are interested in. They're visual, and especially in an online course, you really want to make it clear where they're going to be going, what they're going to be doing, with also grabbing their interest.
I'm your host.
Parentheses,
Instructor.
instructor.
Yeah. So, that's another thing. It's he has kind of this fun, loose lingo that he's using, hey guys, so what am I doing here? So it's you're kind of relating to your students in that sense that I'm trying to be informal here. This is a nice presentation to what the course is going to be like, but I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I want you to feel at ease and comfortable. So with his language, he's done that as well. So that's another example too of grabbing your learner's attention. The next example, I wanted to point this out. It may not seem like it would grab attention, but in a sense it does, because it's pointing out to your learners, where do I go from here? So this is on the instructor's homepage. So within the inline links, it will take the student to where they need to go. So it's a very quick bulleted list of what they need to be doing. So they're not confused, and they understand what is going to be accomplished here in the beginning of the course. So it's just a nice way for them to think, okay, this makes sense to me, it's clear to me, so I'm going to proceed forward. Another example of grabbing your students' interest might be a fun activity. This instructor wanted his students to hum a recognizable theme song from a television show and record themselves. So, it's just an example of thinking outside of the box and thinking about how's a way that I can get my students engaged with the content. So this is basically a course to learn about web conferencing. So he's trying to engage these tools with his students, but also doing something fun with them. Well, this is a fun activity. I can hum a theme song, and I can also listen to what my peers have done too. So it's a great way for them to not know that they're learning, but they are learning because they're exploring these tools in order to accomplish this activity. So the number two tip, I'll pass it off to Sean.
Oh yeah. All right, so number 2, which you might be able to tell from the compass picture up here, is course navigation, so guiding students through the course. So you guys, as instructors here, you essentially are your own instructional designers. You're the ones building your courses. So that means that it's important for you guys to deliver the information in a way that the students can understand it. But your responsibility is also to set up your course in a way that has clear navigation for the students. So why do we want to do that? Because we don't want our students to be going through our courses and spending 2 hours trying to find their way through it. We want them to spend their time learning and understanding the material, not having to figure out where do I go, what do I do. So organizing your course in a very clear and consistent way is an extremely important part of instructional design. So putting this into some tips. So one is to use the least amount of words possible when you're writing your instructions for your students. The more that they have to read, the more information that they're trying to take in, the less they're probably going to retain. So the simpler you can make your instructions in your course, the better. Using consistent formatting. This is a huge thing. I am such a stickler for this kind of thing. If you are a bullet list guy or gal, stick to bullet lists. If you're a numbered list guy or gal, stick to numbered lists. If you're switching it up, it can just be kind of jarring for the user. It's not as intuitive. Once they get used to your formatting style and you're consistent with it, then they're going to know what to expect, and it's going to be much more intuitive for them to move through the course.
Is this supposed to be advancing?
No,
Okay.
it is not. We're just absorbing the information as we look at this compass image right here. And I'm going to show you some examples of this after I go through these tips. So using consistent, not only formatting, but also wording. So when you're doing instructions for a discussion, for example, keeping those instructions consistent throughout all of the discussions in your course. And a really, really great way to do that is to copy and paste the instructions. Once you've done your one instruction for your first discussion, copy and paste that into the next one, and then just change the particulars. But if there's a section in there about, how do you actually submit the discussion, you want that to be the same all the way through. So that's a really nice way to just do that easily. And that goes right into including instructions when students are encountering a task for the very first time. So don't assume that your students know how to do anything in Canvas necessarily. You might say upload this assignment by this day and that's it. But if it's their first time using the assignment uploader in Canvas, it might be really helpful for them to include some instructions on you click this button and here's how you submit your file. And then you can copy and paste those into all of those, all of your following assignments. So one really just kind of summarizing guiding principle is imagine that you were in your course as a student for the very first time. It's your very first online course, your very first course in Canvas. What are you going to see when you first go into your course? What information are you going to encounter? So here are some examples that we can look at. This is the same one that Kay just showed as our attention getter, but this is a really great navigation tool because if I'm a student who's my first time in an online course or my first time in Canvas, and I go on my home page and I see this, I'm going to go, oh, this is great because I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. So it tells me, go to your syllabus. And even having maybe some instructions about click on the modules link on the left to access the course content, and this is how the information is going to be laid out for you. Having that information right away when they get in there and seeing it from a first-timer's perspective is really a great way to think about it. Having a syllabus. This is a really important part of having clear navigation and clear instructions for your students. And you can do this either through the syllabus tool in Canvas, or you can create a syllabus by using Pages and creating a syllabus module. It's up to you. There are benefits of doing it either way, but as long as you include some really key points in your syllabus, whichever way you do it, you're good to go. And those key things, just a couple of key things, we could do probably a whole session on a syllabus. But having very clear due dates, having some sort of a calendar in there that says here's when things are due, here's exactly what's due on these dates is incredibly important so students don't have to hunt around to find the due dates. And another one is a really clear grading scheme so that they understand exactly how they're going to be graded, how many points all the assignments are worth. Just right off the bat, they've got that information there. And then this last screenshot here, this is just an example of consistent formatting. I mentioned having consistent formatting, and this is a really great example of this because you can see in each of these modules, they use the same type of format for the naming convention for things and also for the organization. So they all got that welcome page that has information welcoming you to the module, and then they all use the same structure as far as how things are organized and also how things are named. Consistency in naming is really important too. I'm going off on a tangent, but also especially like in instructions, if I call this one assignment, assignment 1 in these instructions, and then in the module it's called presentation assignment, that's it's a small thing maybe, but it's like really confusing for a student if they're going, I don't know where this assignment was. So if your naming conventions are consistent, that can go a really, really long way for saving your students time. Okay, so tip number 3. This tip is about learning objectives, clearly defining the objectives in your course. This is a really, really huge part of instructional design. So, Gray Harriman, who's an instructional designer, I like his definition for objectives. Objectives will define the skills, knowledge, or behaviors that students must reach in order to successfully complete the course or the module. So some standards will dictate that you should have course level objectives and module level objectives. But if you're new to putting objectives into your course, I would say that maybe you could start with some course level objectives and make sure that you have those clearly defined. If you're already using course level objectives, then you might want to explore using some module level objectives and how to align those with your course level objectives. Raise your hand if you're using objectives in your course. Most people, cool. So objectives help a couple of things. They help you as an instructor. If you define your objectives as the very, very first thing as you're creating your course, that's going to help you as you're creating your content and organizing your course because you know exactly what the goals are. It's also going to help your students understand exactly what they're expected to know and what they're expected to be able to do when they finish the course. So probably we could do a whole session on objectives, but probably the most important tip about objectives is making sure that they are measurable. So having them be something that you can actually measure in your course and specifically in your online course. So when you are creating a measurable objective, one of the most important things there is choosing the verb that you're using. Choosing an action verb in that objective that is going to be accurate and is going to be something that you can actually measure. So just raise your hand if this looks familiar to you. Who knows what this is?
Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy. This is like your best friend when you are coming up with your objectives. So Bloom's taxonomy, if you're not familiar with it, we won't go into it a whole lot, but essentially it's going to give you different action verbs that you can use in different situations and different levels of thinking. And so you can look at this to kind of help you figure out, do I want my students to interpret? Do I want my students to be summarizing? But they're all going to be action verbs, that things that your students are actually going to be doing that you can measure. So let's take a look at this objective. By the conclusion of this module, students will understand how protein and DNA are synthesized. Who thinks that this is a measurable objective? And if you do, why do you think this might be a measurable objective? No one. Okay, great. Well, you guys can all go. So this is not a measurable objective. Understand is great, but how do we measure that somebody understands something? So how about this one? By the conclusion of this module, students will be able to summarize the mechanisms of inheritance in the process by which protein and DNA are synthesized. Yes, totally measurable.
So content. This is obviously the meat of your course, and there are infinite ways that you can present content. I kind of touched on some as it relates to grabbing your students' attention, but when it comes to presenting the content, you want to dig a little deeper. So the first one is thinking about gamification. Now, gamification doesn't necessarily mean you turn your entire course into a game, but it just means that the way you present your content, you surround that by perhaps a gamified way, such as we had an instructor where you could earn 1 million points in his course. So, one writing assignment may have been worth 100,000 points. So that was exciting for students. They felt like they couldn't wait to get to that $1 million point. So that's an example of gamification where you're not necessarily changing the content, but you're changing the way that the students are interpreting it. And here's an example from this instructor where, this is an assignment, it's graded, there are points assigned to this, and he is going to ask them to go to this website, and it's an interactive website where the students can direct this man and think about different scenarios that this man could go through. So they're having fun, they're engaged. It's a different way than to just have them read an article and then post a discussion on what they thought about the article. This is a way for them to engage the content that they've learned thus far and now engage in this activity and present an output that's different than just writing something out. They're learning something, they're engaging with the content here. Another example, as we touched on earlier when it comes to grabbing attention, is as it relates to your content, posting videos to relay content to your students. Perhaps you found something on YouTube that perfectly illustrates that module's heading, that module's topic for the week. So you're going to go ahead and post that instead of writing out lecture notes or having them read an article. This is a way for them to just have a different opportunity to explore content in a different fashion. And then another example is storytelling. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, this is a really important way to build that community with your students and have your students build that community. So this is an example. It's again a discussion, and he had assigned points to this. So he wanted people to write about their best learning experience and just focus on telling the story. So again, if you're building your course correctly, they can be mindful of this content, but here's a different way that you're presenting that content to them and then having them output something. So when you're building these different ways of presenting your content, think about your objectives. Think about what you want your students to get. Why are they doing this activity? And how will they benefit from this activity if I present it in a different way? They may learn about different tools. They may learn about something from their classmate. So there are different opportunities here when it comes to presenting your content. So tip number 5, what's more beautiful than the relationship between peanut butter and jelly? Well, it could be the relationship between content and what students already know. So it's creating that synergy, it's creating that connection. And one way to help students connect with what they already know to the content is having them actually do real life simulations. So you have perhaps, they are a computer engineer and they need to work on a software issue. You're actually going to have them do this simulation while going through the content. So they know the content, now they actually get to apply it to a real life scenario. Anytime you can draw the parallel between this is why I'm presenting this content to you, because you're going to have to actually exercise these skills in the workforce. Whether you're a doctor, whether you're a communicator, whether you're a teacher, whether you are a business leader. This is why I'm having you do this exercise, so they can really draw that connection and build that relationship between the content because they see the meaning behind why you're having them retain this information. You can also design decision-making scenarios by asking learners to apply the course content to a problem that they may actually encounter in real life. So you present the problem and then they come up with a solution. And the reason this is important because you're still there with them. You're still the instructor. You can add little tips, little secrets, little did you think about, so you still have the opportunity to engage with them as they're learning this, but yet they can still have that real life experience. So that's tip number 5. And here's just a discussion here where this instructor, the idea of absorb, do, connect, keeping those 3 words in your mind when you're thinking about an assignment for your students. You want them to absorb the content that you've presented to them. You want them to do an activity or a discussion or watch a video that's based off of that content that you just presented to them. And then you want them to be able to connect that with a real life experience so they can see that progression. The content's been given to me, I've absorbed it, now I get to do it in an actual simulation where I get to interact with that content, and now I get to connect it to what I may be doing when I graduate. So this is just an example of that instructor working that activity with his students in the format of a discussion.
Okay, tip number 6. Hang on. Tip number 6. Okay, so we've talked about catching learners' attention. We talked about the organization of your content. We talked about a couple of tips for delivering the content and the instruction, the material to your students. So tip number 6 is to assess the performance of your learners. And we've already kind of gotten into a little bit of that with some of these ideas for different kinds of assignments you can do. But assessing the performance of your learners is inextricably tied to the creation of your module objectives. So when you are creating your objectives and you were creating those action verbs and thinking about ways that you can actually measure what they were doing in your course, now that it's time to create your assignments, half of your job is already done because you're going to be looking at the action verb you chose for your objective and thinking about an assessment that will match up with that. So there's a couple of different types of assessments, and raise your hand if you're familiar with these two. So who could tell us what a formative assessment is?
Learning as you go along, developing, it's not punitive.
Developing, sure, yeah. I think developing is a great word, and actually, formative kind of gives part of it away. There are assessments that are helping the students to form the knowledge, and they may or may not be graded. I think a discussion is a great example of a formative assignment or a formative assessment, because it is something they may be graded on, but it's still an assessment in which they're maybe developing their understanding of the material through the discussion. And what about a summative assessment? Who can give us a definition for that one? See how much they've learned. Sure, yeah. So, yes.
What they've retained.
What they've retained, right. So summative, this word kind of gives it away too. This is sort of testing all of the knowledge that they have received either at the end of a module maybe or at the end of the entire course. So the reason that we want to talk about these is because it can be really beneficial to learners to have a good balance between these two things. Having some formative assessments that are happening during the module, and then some sort of a summative assessment at the end that's testing to make sure that they've actually retained that information. And just briefly, another type of assessment, we kind of left it out here. I might have put in another slide that said authentic assessments, because that's another really cool buzzword. And it's a buzzword, but it's a really cool type. It's a really cool way of thinking about your assessments. And Kate was talking about them exactly when she's talking about relating what the students are doing to content that they already know or to their real lives. So thinking about your assessments being authentic is a really great thing to think about as well. Because if you can create an assessment in which a student is actually using the material in the way that they would use it in their real lives, in a job that they would use that skill, that's a really great way to help them retain it, but also help them understand it, but also help them retain it in the future.
The word I used in my objectives is apply.
Apply.
They apply, by the end of the semester, you will be able to apply.
Totally. And, that's another great reason why it's good to have course level objectives and module level objectives, because that's a great course level objective. Being able to apply this knowledge to your life. And then if you wanted to go into module objectives, then you can get more specific, Then you could have discuss, be able to discuss this concept. And then they're discussing it with people in that module. But then at the end of the course, exactly, then you can take what you've discussed and you can apply it. Okay, so before we get into an entire session on that too, let's look at this objective, which we decided was a good measurable one. By the conclusion of this module, students will be able to summarize the mechanisms of inheritance and the process by which protein and DNA are synthesized. So let's just throw out some ideas of assessments that might match up with that objective. How could we measure that students are able to do that? Anyone? Just throw them out there.
Written paper.
Totally, you could write an essay, written paper. What else could they do?
Video module.
They could do a video.
And well, in the case of protein and DNA synthesis, I don't know, to me it's somewhat, and I'm not a scientist, you may be based on your homework, it's visual as much as it is understanding the processes. So maybe for the discipline, you could tailor the discipline to how they would summarize it. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there.
Sure. So maybe they create a video in which they're explaining it.
Yeah.
Like a video presentation. Totally. Anything else? So pretty much what you guys mentioned, we could do an essay, we could do a presentation of some sort, we could have a discussion, and presentation that's incredibly broad. This is anything that in which they're presenting their material, but you can be incredibly creative with what your students are using to create their presentations and how they're delivering that material. So assessments aligned with this objective probably wouldn't include something like a multiple choice quiz or a test. If your objective is for them to be able to summarize a concept and they're selecting multiple choice answers, that doesn't necessarily match up. If it was identify, then maybe you could use something like this. So tip number 7 is to give your learners feedback. And I'm sure this is something that you guys are all already doing, because it's part of the way that our online courses are set up. You're already giving them grades, which is feedback. But it's also just important to think about the kind of feedback that you're giving and how you're giving it to your students. So if you're using something like SpeedGrader is a really fantastic way to be able to give students very specific feedback on if it's an essay or something that they've submitted, you're giving them feedback right on the actual paper, and you're able to give them some general comments. So here are just some 4 tips about feedback just to take away, because we're just trying to do quick tips. We're trying to be concise. Okay. So being quick about it. This is a tough one. If you're an online teacher, it's easy to get behind in grading. But the faster that you can give students that feedback, the fresher that information and that assignment and that assessment that they've done is in their minds, so the more it may have an impact on them. Making sure it's personalized, using somebody's name and really just personalizing it in some way so you're not just copying and pasting can go a long way, especially in online where it can be easy to lose that the personal touch between people. And being specific about what they did or did not do, very helpful. And finally, relating it to the progress towards one of your objectives. So helping them understand, this is the objective that we're working towards, and that's why, took off some points here because you may need to work on this area to help you get to this objective. Then they understand, okay, well, I get why it's important that I need to learn that. Rubrics are awesome, by the way. They're a really, really easy way for you to just sort of set up a lot of your feedback ahead of time and your expectations. And then when it's time to give your feedback, even if you're just clicking those radio buttons, there's 75% of your feedback right there, and it's specific and it's detailed, it's relevant. And then you can add something into a comment box that makes it personal, it gives a little personal touch. But rubrics do a lot of the work for you, by the way. Okay, so how about this feedback? Yeah, no, it's not really helpful, right? I mean,
Makes me feel good.
Yeah, it makes you feel good, but I don't
So
really
you don't know why you feel good.
I don't even know what the assignment. Yeah. So how about this feedback? Nice work, Sean. You did an excellent job summarizing the process of synthesis for DNA. I took off 5 points because your descriptions of the protein synthesis process was lacking information about the amino acids we discussed in this module. 1 point off for a few grammatical errors which are noted in your essay. It's personal, it has my name, it's very specific, it tells me exactly what things I got points off for, and it's relating directly to the material. It's letting me know these are the objectives or these are the things that you missed that you're working for. And of course, I submitted this within like 24 hours of the student turning in his assignment, so it was quick.
Can I add something to
Yes.
that?
Oh yeah.
I've kind of flipped around how I do my feedback now because, it's very easy to say, these are the weaknesses that I saw. And instead I have flipped it around to say, your essay could have been strengthened by.
Yes.
And so that way it doesn't feel like, well, she took something away from me, but rather I could have strengthened it by doing thus and such. So just that subtle little change seems to have made a difference for my students.
That's a really great point, and I think especially because we're online, that's even a more important point because it's so easy to read into the wording of things. If I do this all, just with text messages, it's so easy to spend forever going, but why did they use that word? And so it is really important to spend that time thinking about how you phrase it. Yeah, thanks for that.
I'll dovetail off of that. This is awesome, even though I'm not supposed to say it that way, right? But the way I grade now is I start with a positive and then
Yes.
I go into essentially what I really want to say. I mean, not that it isn't good, right? But I always start with a positive because as you're reading your own stuff and people are critiquing it, it's better to hear one good thing before you go into a litany of here's what you could have done better.
Right.
So your
Right.
approach is good too. Thank you.
Totally.
Since I've been using that tactic, people ask less questions on why the essay got graded the way it did.
Mhm.
And also, I completely am a fan of rubrics, like you said. Since
Yeah.
I started using rubrics, there's not as much contention.
Yeah.
Now I've jinxed myself this semester.
Right, because
but yeah,
you're setting up the criteria ahead of time, so
Right.
then you're
There's
you
no
know,
surprises.
there's
And
no
I
surprises.
give them all the rubrics
Exactly.
ahead of time before the assignments due, and that's invaluable to less people doing what I call going feral.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, running rogue.
And
Yeah.
some people refer to something like this, and I didn't actually do it here, but as a feedback sandwich, which I really like that tactic too.
Yeah.
I agree, I do that. I start with something, and whatever it is. I mean, I've had assignments where I'm like, I gotta find something
Yeah,
here,
exactly.
that was positive. And I might often follow it up with something like, other than that, you did an excellent job,
Sure.
overall, whatever, yeah. But, starting with something and even maybe ending. Sorry?
Other than that.
Other than, right. Yeah,
That's worth a lot.
totally. Great job.
And on time. It's
Yeah.
still a deep
You put your name on the assignment, which was fantastic.
Find something, yes.
I want to know if anyone else has had this issue.
That's good.
We're going to start something this semester that we haven't done, and that, we have students turn stuff in, and they always say, well, I didn't know where the comments were. I didn't know you wrote any comments, and so we're going to have our first assignment be find the comments and tell me what the comments were.
Good,
Mhm.
That's good.
Because, they spend the whole semester going, well, you never marked anything on my report. And we're like, yeah, it's right there.
Right.
And they don't know how to see the comments.
Well,
Right.
you know what
They don't
problem
open
I've
it up.
discovered, if you're using Word and the new track changes, some students don't know they have to click that red bar on the side in the margin
Well,
to
I'm
be
talking
able to
like
see the comments.
when they submit it on Canvas.
Oh, when they
Yeah,
say, okay,
yeah,
well, then there's
through-
no excuse.
We make
Right.
it but they don't know how to see the comments. I don't know why
So,
that is.
yeah,
Well-
those are situations where, like, creating a quick screen capture video can go such a long way. I've encouraged people for a long time to start their course off with a quick 5-minute screen capture video. Here's a tour of your course. Here's where you go to see your content. Here's where you go to see your grade book. Here's where you go to see here's how you submit a quick assignment. I'm Sean and I'm going to be your instructor. It's great to meet you guys, whatever. That can answer 50% of your questions.
Right.
Well, even though I know all the TAs do that, and the students hear it, but
We
You're
can't,
never
we
going
can't
to
make
still get
them,
questions, yeah.
Yeah, we can't
Yeah.
make them read or watch
Right.
things.
Right.
Is there any evidence or research on actually typing these in versus using Canvas's audio function?
That's a good question. Not that I know of.
The reason I ask is because I have 50 plus students.
Right.
And I'm sorry, great job on this assignment. It's really attractive when it's
I
2 in
hear
the
ya.
morning and to do this. And what I end up doing is I'll tell them their grammar isn't so good, but I've embedded 6 or 7 grammar and spelling errors as I'm typing these because I gotta get done.
Right.
Okay, so here's two things that I do. One is if you have a Mac, you can use the voice dictation if you triple hit the function button. If you have a Mac, if you don't have a Mac, it doesn't apply to you. And you can just speak and it'll hear your voice and it'll dictate all the words for you. And then you can go in and make your changes to any errors, which is way faster than typing the whole thing out. The other thing, and then there's probably something equivalent that you can find for Windows PC. The other thing that I do is I keep a file or some sort of a document that has my feedback, and I do a lot of copy and paste. Because if it's an assignment and there's 20 of them, people are going to make the same mistakes. So once I've written out that part, you made a few grammar errors. In the speed grader, maybe I've pointed them out specifically, but in general comments, I can copy and paste. They need the grammar part, and they need the part about structure, and then I can add their name and add a couple things that tie it together, But there is a way, I think, to copy and paste strategically that can. Those are just a couple of tips, but I understand it.
Can you repeat
Yeah.
that dictation?
Sure. Yeah.
What is it?
If you press the function
Function.
button 3 times, the first time you do it, it will ask you if you want to install a dictation. If you want to download and install the dictation application, and I would recommend that you do that because it's way faster and way more accurate. It'll just save a little dictation thing on your hard drive, and then from then on, when you triple hit function, it will just bing, and you'll see a
And
little.
then you can just copy and paste that text out.
It will actually do it wherever your cursor is. So if you click your cursor in the feedback box anywhere on a document or
In a Word doc. or
anywhere that your cursor is, triple hit the function button, and you'll see a little bubble pop up next to your cursor that has a microphone icon, and it'll show you your audio levels, and you'll speak, and it'll put the words in where your cursor is. And it works pretty well.
And to answer your question about research, I know Patrick Lowenthal is doing quite a bit of research on the use of video in a classroom, but I don't think any of that's published yet. But he is working on that.
I was just wondering if it would help.
The other thing,
I mean, the other thing I can think of is when you get really ticked at 2 in the morning, you could say things that you really
Yeah.
regret
I
the
know.
next day.
and part of the reason I suggest that dictation thing too is because we also had a presentation on accessibility earlier today. So if you're thinking about accessibility, having text as your feedback is going to make sure that your feedback is accessible to students who might have hearing disabilities.
It might kill the visual handicapped person.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there a program, I'm now looking at apps here, and is there a program that does both so that you're being user-friendly, where you can give the verbal and it's recorded, and then also it's going to type it the way that dictation would? Because that would be optimal for either one.
Mhm.
I'm just curious.
It's a good question. I know that so the Canvas tool will.
The speed grader, yeah.
It
So
will-
if they're using a screen reader and they're going through whatever you've done in speed grader for their assignment, then the screen reader will read everything for them. Your comments, your suggestions, if something's has a strike through, it will pick all of that up. Because Canvas is 508 compliant and the gold standard when it comes to accessibility. So if it's in Canvas,
It's already good.
yes. So
Okay.
if you've typed something out, a screen reader will capture that.
All right, I'll do some legwork on that. But so it's just something that, like, as you're talking, I'm like, wow, I bet there's something out there. And if there is,
I'm sure
it
there
covers
is,
the
yeah.
bases
So
for the
you,
visual or the auditory, depending on somebody's abilities.
you're thinking about something that would like record your audio, but also have the transcript
Correct.
at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just think
I'm
about
not sure.
uploading
Thanks
to
for the info.
YouTube and
Yeah.
captioning it.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes.
2
Okay,
minutes.
so the final tip is reevaluate and repeat. Don't wait until you get your FCQs to make changes to your course. Throughout the course, assess your students. Have a quick little quiz or a quick discussion. Hey guys, how are things going? What's working, what's not working? And be nimble, be flexible, willing to change what's not working if it makes sense to you, the instructor. If you don't want to change it, that is fine. Just be able to defend why you don't want to change it. I'm going to keep this in actually, guys, because of X, Y, and Z. Thank you for the feedback, but I'm going to keep this in. Or you're right, this needs to be changed. It doesn't make sense. So just keep that in mind. And then you're going to repeat again. But it should be evolving. It should be changing based on your audience.
You know, this is where that new sandbox generator really helps, because
Right.
I've been generating a new course right away, and it's kind of my course in development, and I copy the current one over, and then I make because sometimes you can't, there are changes you can't make
True.
midstream,
True.
but then you can incorporate them in the one you're going to copy from.
And even highlighting that, based on feedback from the past semester, I've changed a few things. I think students appreciate that, so they know that their feedback is appreciated and acknowledged. Yes.
Well, one good way I heard of wording that sort of midterm feedback from students is, when were you most engaged and when did you feel sort of most distant from the class?
Good. Yeah.
So that gives kind of an open-ended question that they can
I like that.
really fill in pretty well.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you.